Welcome to the Final Girls podcast, where we celebrate Christmas by watching slashers set in the summer. I'm Anna Bogutska, co-founder of the Final Girls Collective and your podcast host. If you're new to the show, welcome. We're currently in the middle of our teen horror focused season and are diving into how this subgenre has evolved, how teenagers and the 27-year-old actors who played them have changed, and why teens make such fascinating horror protagonists. Before we dive into our episode this week, a quick reminder, you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at The Final Girls UK, and as good millennials, we also have a Patreon where you can support us at patreon.com/The Final Girls. If you enjoy this podcast, I'd really appreciate you leaving a little review over an Apple Podcast. Consider it a little Christmas gift. And because I enjoy being a contrarian and sticking to a schedule equally, this week I'm bringing you a bit of Christmas counter programming with a Somerset slasher double bill. I Know What You Did Last Summer and its sequel, I Still Know What You Did Last Summer. Full disclosure, I had not revisited these films in a long while, so watching them back to back was an experience. The first film, based on an unproduced Kevin Williamson script that was rushed into production after the success of Scream, was one of those sleepover jump scare classics that is more meme than horror, but such a ride to revisit. And joining me on this episode is the horror fan and horror VHS collector Ali Penelope, who makes her Final Girls podcast debut with this extreme 90s double bill. Just to flag, there was something going on with Ali's mic, so there is a little bit of static that I wasn't able to take out in the edit. Please excuse that, and hopefully it won't impact your enjoyment of the episode too much. And with all of that said, wish you a Merry Christmas. Hope you have a lovely festive season filled with horror films and 90s nostalgia. And with all of that said, please enjoy our take on the I Know What You Did Last Summer double bill.
We're gonna fry no matter who takes the fall.
Can we leave right now?
No way, are you crazy?
The grill's busted. There's blood everywhere.
We can clean it up. Come on.
Listen to yourselves! No, we are going to the police!
We don't have time for your shit! You understand? We gotta move fast!
Hey! Now let's try to stay calm. Focus.
Don't you get it? If there's some of him on the car, there's some of the car on him. They're gonna trace it back to you. You're looking at a hit and run.
Then we dump the body.
You've lost it.
But just pretend we were never here.
We could drag him to the water and dump him in. They wouldn't find the fucker for weeks. By that time, all the evidence would be washed away.
You found him at all? The currents are strong. The undertow could carry him out to sea.
Ali, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm a little hungover now.
That's what I like to hear.
But you know what? That's really the best time to record a podcast about 90s teen horror films.
I agree completely, especially when we're talking about the Jennifer Love Hewitt classics. I Know What You Did Last Summer.
Exactly. Well, and also, it's the wrong time of year for this film, but I kind of love that we're talking about these films, these, July 4th classics right before Christmas. I've never watched these films this time of year before, so it was a fun revisit.
Do you know what? I'm getting ahead of myself, but I actually completely forgot that these were based around the 4th of July. So that was also a surprise for me rewatching them. I was like, oh, okay.
Yep.
Christmas? So Ali, since it's your first time on the podcast, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what's your relationship with horror?
Yeah, absolutely. I hate to say that I don't really have any kind of public facing stuff around horror, but I work in digital media. I'm a partnerships manager for an amazing company called Little Dot Studios. We're a digital media agency, and I've been doing that for about 5 years. I started out as a content editor, so I would edit content for social media, and now I sort of oversee strategy and all that sort of stuff. But it's really rewarding because social media and the digital media space is just constantly evolving, and I get to work with amazing content, not just horror content or film content, but everything. All that stuff's great. And then, but on a personal side, I am just a horror junkie. I'll take it in any form. Let me watch it. Let me read it. Let me snort it. Let me inject it in my body. So I used to briefly did a podcast with a friend of the pod, Mike Munzer from Evolution of Horror, and our friend Dan, which was so fun, but it was tied in with something with work. And so they ultimately didn't want to take the project forward. And I've been sort of looking to do something since then because I just love horror. I love talking about it. I love watching it. I've been reading a lot of it in quarantine. I'm a really big reader too. So lots of Stephen King in my life in the last 24 months.
Oh, you're a King fan.
I am a massive King fan to the point where I feel kind of basic about it because there's I've been trying to branch out this year. That was my goal because I realized I was just reading too much Stephen King.
No such thing. No such thing, and no shame in being a constant reader.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, exactly. So I actually started reading some Joe Hill. I really branched out.
You branched out to the children of Stephen King.
Exactly. I've been reading some Stephen Graham Jones, some Paul Tremblay, and it's been kind of nice to actually step away from films a little bit and just put my nose in a book and just explore horror in its many different iterations.
Well, it's really exciting to have you in this podcast. We actually met sort of digitally. We've never met in person, which is one of the weird but fabulous things about making podcasts.
But we've been in the same physical space together. We just did not see each other.
I know, so strange. So I only know you as this, digital voice that I've heard recording Kill Count with you, which is the podcast that you were referencing before, which was really fun to make. And now recording, in this as the disembodied voice talking about Stephen King, one of my favorite horror authors, and also my entry point personally into horror literature as well. I still remember when I was allowed to go into the big girl section of my local library, and I just beeline for the Stephen Kings.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was like, I'm a big R.L. Stine fan, even now.
Oh, yes.
Even now. And I'll tell you what, like if I'm folding laundry or I'm doing the dishes, I'll throw on an episode of Goosebumps. Because it's just,
That's so cute.
It's like warm and cozy. And I feel like R.L. Stine and like Christopher Pike, those guys are just like Stephen King for kids. And then you're right, you get to go to the big girl section and you pick out your first Stephen King book, and then it's like all bets are off.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, R.L. Stine, Christopher Pike were very much kind of the appetizers for the big girl horror that was Stephen King.
Yes. I don't know if you've recently gone back and read any Goosebumps books, but they do not hold up.
I have not. I do remember being mocked by my parents because I just kept buying more and more more and more Goosebumps books and Christopher Pike books, to the point where it just got to the point where they were like, no, just go to the fucking library.
Yes, I know. I think I have so many that my mom made me ditch because she was like, I don't have the space for this anymore. And now all of my stuff is like sitting in her garage. And it was mostly books.
And now as an adult, despite going through my teenage phase of kind of throwing away all those Goosebumps and Pike books, now I'm just trolling eBay looking for packages of those books, being like, but I want them.
I know. I've had to stop myself because, we live in London with it's tiny spaces.
Exactly.
And I'm like, someday I'll own a home. Every millennial's dream. And I will have bookshelves in that home, and then I can collect to my heart's content.
You know what? I have a massive bookshelf that I'm looking at right now, and it's not enough You know
No.
what? It's never enough because now it's just they're just piling up every single corner that's available in my flat is piled high with books. So you get the millennial dream, and then it's still not enough. It's like,
Oh, no, don't tell me that.
I don't actually want to own a flat. I just want to own a library, just like
Yeah.
bookshelves with a bed in the middle.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Like, did you ever watch, oh gosh, Shelley Duvall's bedtime stories?
No.
It's like this is my entry to Shelley Duvall, not The Shining.
Uh-huh.
Sorry, we haven't even started talking about I Know You Did Last Summer yet. She did this, it was in this amazing she would introduce children's books. And it was like, hi, I'm Shelley Duvall. Welcome to Bedtime Stories. And it was like a magical book, like the set was like a book that would open up. And it was like literally her bed. And then the room was just surrounded by books. And she'd grab a book and she'd open it and then the story would begin. It was great. I think it was from like the late 80s or the early 90s. I had them on VHS.
I feel like I might need to reschedule this recording so I can just stop and go watch this.
It's great. They're great. They're so charming.
But you're right. We've been kind of geeking out over horror books, which is definitely a conversation I want to continue. I feel like we should meet in a cafe that is, or in a library that's just surrounded by books. We're here really to talk about these two teen horror slasher semi-classics, let's call them. But before we get into the I Know What You Did double bill, can you tell me whether you're a fan of teen horror in general as a subgenre?
I would say teen horror is my favorite of the subgenres, if I'm most honest, because I always like to think that like a really good ghost story is probably my favorite. Like I think for like peak horror for me that I really marinate in is like The Changeling.
Oh, yes.
But if I'm honest about what I watch the most and what I really enjoy, it's slashers. Across the board slashers. But I think really honing in a 90s slasher, there's the nostalgia aspect for me. But I just, the atmosphere, the ambiance, the revitalization that happened in the 90s, like it's just like lightning in a bottle with so many of these films. And I mean, no, this is like the perfect, I loved when you announced that you were doing this series because I was like, she made this series just for me. Because all of them, I'm like, yes, that's a banger. That's a classic. That's a classic.
Listen, to quote the not so great Kendall Roy, this whole teen horror season is all bangers all the time.
Exactly.
Let's get into I Know What You Did Last Summer specifically.
Don't you see? He's got us now. Okay, this is exactly what he wants. We can't go to the police. Not now. He's made sure of that. He's just out there and he's watching us and waiting. What are you waiting for, huh? What are you waiting for?
This is coming hot on the heels of what you very rightly call kind of the slasher revival of the 1990s, which came pretty much because of Scream. So before we dig into the film, can you, for anyone who's not rewatched I Know What You Did Last Summer recently, can you briefly summarize the plot of the movie for me?
Okay, so I Know What You Did Last Summer is about 4 teens who are about to go into that last crazy summer before they enter the world of adulthood. And they're all prepared to have the best summer of their lives. But as they're driving home, maybe there's some alcohol involved, maybe, they hit a man. And they believe they've killed him. And so they're all dealing with the trauma of this event. And from then on, it sort of becomes a revenge film. And it flashes forward to the following summer when they've all returned home. And sort of in various states of just like trauma and grief and just their lives falling apart due to the results of having to keep this secret. And then, you know, this presence starts to come back and maybe he didn't die. Maybe somebody knows what they did. And then the bodies just start stacking up.
Beautiful summary. And I wanted to ask you, because we referenced the fact that this is very much part of the slasher revival of the 1990s. This was also a script penned by Kevin Williamson, who famously wrote Scream. Does it feel like a Kevin Williamson script to you?
Well, it's hard to say because Scream really it's the gold standard. Yes. You know, I really enjoy I Know What You Did Last Summer, but Scream is obviously just its own thing. And you can't, it's not really fair to compare any other 90s teen horror film to it because
it will always come up lacking.
It will always lose, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think for me, it doesn't necessarily, well, it does feel like a Kevin Williamson film because it reminds me more of like Dawson's Creek.
Oh.
Maybe that's also the setting of the coastal town. Yeah, well, because he did some Dawson stuff, right? He created Dawson's. And that's all filmed in North Carolina. I don't know if it's set there. I think it might be. And so is this film. This film is partially filmed and set in coastal North Carolina. So for me, that's the atmosphere I get. So it does feel very Kevin Williamson, but it doesn't feel very Scream.
Yeah, and I think you're right. It would be unfair to compare it to Scream too much because Scream was like lightning in a bottle, and it had this, genius horror director who was already so established and already so known for establishing these wonderful iconic franchises, and a very fresh-faced, very young new screenwriter who had a completely different approach, even generational approach to horror. What I do find very interesting is that it does feel like someone almost imitating Kevin Williamson. I know that chronologically this screenplay came before Scream, so it does feel a little bit less fully formed than that. But I think some of the zingers, specifically, some of the humor that's left over in the script is where I could see Kevin's style, if that makes sense.
Yeah, again, I think the reason it doesn't feel very Kevin Williamson is because if we're comparing it to Scream, that's, as you were saying, like it's such a collaborative effort with Wes Craven that his presence is just so felt there that trying to compare them, I feel like it does feel a bit more like Dawson's Creek. It feels a bit more like a Saturday morning episode of something. I know what you mean about the imitation.
Yeah.
It's like, well, it was written, I think it was written first, right? It wasn't, the script was just sitting around gathering dust. And then they were like, Kevin Williamson, what's that guy doing after Scream? Let's get everything he's ever made into production. So, I kind of understand why it might feel that way because maybe he hadn't really come into his own yet.
Let's talk a little bit more in depth about the film itself. Kind of what do you make of our key quartet of teenage characters? That's Julie, played by Jennifer Love Hewitt, Helen Shivers, which is a great name for a character, played by Sarah Michelle Gellar, and Barry, the token jock doucheboy, played by Ryan Phillippe, and Ray.
Perfect casting.
Perfect casting. And also Ray, the, I guess, other douchebag, but he's a fisherman and he's Freddie Prinze Jr.
He's like douchebag with a heart of gold.
Yes.
He has a lot of pain built up inside, and the only person who knows about it is Julie James, which, again, all of their names, fantastic names. Julie James, loving the alliteration. Because I feel like Final Girls have great names in general, but Julie on itself, it's like, her name's Julie, and it's like, no, it's Julie James. But then, as you were saying, like Helen Shivers, I'm sorry, now I'm just talking about their names, but their names are great. Helen Shivers, to me, I'm like, why isn't she the final girl with a name like Shivers? Because that's fantastic. I mean, this cast is 90s teen royalty. And I think that's the reason that this film, it's like we were talking about the Kevin Williamson script, but I think it's elevated by the sheer pop stardom of this cast. And that's why it's so lasting in terms of its legacy. Because, I never watched like Ghost Whisperer or anything or I didn't really watch Party of Five when Jennifer Love Hewitt was on it, but I'm a massive Buffy fan. And this was right around the same time Buffy was starting. So she probably didn't have that same, people didn't associate her with Buffy in the same way as they would now in retrospect watching it. But, and then, it's just like the Sarah Michelle Gellar starring with Freddie Prinze Jr. I'm like, is this I Know What You Did Last Summer? Is this I Know What You Did Last Summer? Is this Scooby-Doo? I don't know. It's just like, it's delicious. I want to eat it all up. Like, I just want to marinate with these characters and these actors in this time and place because it doesn't really matter what they're doing to me on screen. They're just so watchable.
Totally. And you're so right also in in saying that it was kind of pop stardom, because all these four actors individually would become so associated with this particular teen movie revival and kind of golden age in the 90s. You know, Freddie Prinze Jr. was the kind of the dreamboat of teens in the 90s. And he doesn't exist outside of that. And obviously Sarah Michelle Gellar is very iconic because of Buffy, but like her on-screen roles very much sit alongside that, and they've almost always been in genre stuff too. And Jennifer Love Hewitt is probably the biggest star at the time because of her already kind of child star career, and because of Party of Five, which I think came to an end about a year after this film came out. She was like a sex symbol in the late 90s as well. So it's just these gorgeous, beautiful young actors who so are the teen heartthrobs of this entire decade. It kind of doesn't even matter what the plot is, because you just want to watch them wear tank tops and run around and have conversations with each other that are vaguely resembling what teenagers might sound like.
Exactly. I think that's why I keep coming back to this film, because I'm just like, I honestly, the plot gets a little convoluted at points. I'm just like, let's just watch them hang out in like coastal North Carolina, as you say, in midriffs. They're just having a good time. There's some crabs at some point. I mean, that's the other thing. It's like there's like other supporting cast. I was like, Big Bang Theory man showed up. I don't watch Big Bang Theory, but I was like, I know that face.
Johnny Galecki being
like,
an asshole.
Wait, he did movies before. Yes. Oh gosh, Psycho remake lady. What's her name? In it too, playing Missy. Yes, and she's so spooky in this movie. And it's a great supporting cast too. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it really is about those four iconic characters, but no, they're great. They're all great.
Can you expand a little bit on what you think about Julie James as a final girl?
Well, what I'll say is this, in the slasher genre, and you have your final girl, you usually don't care about the other characters dying. Mm-hmm. And so you kind of really root for the final girl, but I don't feel like the film ever really aligns itself with anybody else. So you don't really care when, the blood starts flowing. In this case, I think that this film is the one where I feel most devastated by a death. Mm-hmm. And I know we already said spoilers. We're in spoiler territory. We're kind of talking about the plot already, but I am just so sad that Helen is also not a final girl in this. I almost like, maybe it's because I just love Sarah Michelle Gellar so much, but she deserves to be the final girl almost more than Julie, I think. And I feel her character is just so broken. Mm-hmm. And she had all these aspirations. You see who she is right at the beginning, and you're like, I know who this bitchy character is. But then she's so much more than that. And it's so devastating to see what her home life is like with her absent, her father, she has no mother there. Her father's completely checked out. Her sister is clearly wildly jealous of her. Mm-hmm. And she's tried to make it in the big wide world of New York City, and she had to come crawling back home with her tail between her legs. And she's just broken. And she just wants her friend Julie back. And it's heartbreaking. And then to top it all off, her death is like, that scene with her death is like probably one of the most iconic scenes in teen, like in slasher history, I think.
And it's also extremely effective because before she actually gets murdered, she also gets kind of tortured by, having the hookman go into her room, cut her hair off while she sleeps, and leave her a nasty message, so that there's so much taunting of Helen going on.
Yeah, the poor girl, man. She needs a break. My heart goes out to Helen. Helen Shivers, like, what a character. Julie James,
less interesting.
I'll say.
Yeah.
I think Julie she's less interesting. But that's the thing about characters that are the goody two-shoes from the beginning. That's why Ray is so boring. Well, but also because they're trying to do the red herring thing with Ray, so they don't really give him that much. But it just means that he's boring. And you're like, I don't care about this guy. It's like, I don't like Barry, but he's more interesting to watch.
I mean, I don't know if I agree, because I just find Barry so uninteresting in a really aggressive kind of way. Like, he keeps yelling at situations, and he keeps trying to fight people. And then when he does fight Ray, he is so bad at fighting. I'm like, oh, you were just such a slimy little shit. Just keep going back to punching unmoving objects, because he clearly cannot throw a real punch, man. And he's just so mean.
Yeah, he's too pretty. He's too pretty for the role that they've cast him in.
Yeah, I mean, Ryan Phillippe is kind of perfect because he does have that, like, I'm too pretty and I know it, and I'm gonna be a sleazebag just because I know you still want to look at me even though I'm being an absolute dipshit. He's perfect for that. He does the same thing in Cruel Intentions. Good for him. He looked great. But yeah, we don't really get to know Barry or Ray that much. They only really exist in order to add something to the girls, really.
Yeah, it's true. I think I wish there had been a little bit more dimension between Julie and Helen's relationship, because there is that scene, where they've gone to see Missy's character, and she's like, I just miss you. I miss you. And
oh my God, and Julie doesn't say anything. It's so heartbreaking.
Yes. And I think the thing that frustrates me about Julie is that she has this sort of moral superiority about her, where, she's like, we should have gone to the she clearly wanted to go to the police. I think judges everybody else in the group for choosing to keep that secret. And I'm like, but girl, you're still keeping it too.
Yes. We've spoken about our lead teenage characters, but we haven't really spoken about the villain yet. So what do you make about the Hookman, both as an urban legend, which they retell at the start, and as the main slasher villain?
Well, the funny thing with this is it's a chicken and an egg situation, because I think to myself, when did I first hear about the Hookman?
Yes.
And because I grew up with that legend too, but I think, was it because I'd watched this film? And it's the same thing with the film, or I think, well, this film came before Urban Legend, right? The other.
Yeah, it came before.
Because I think, if anything, those films and this film and that film just really brought those. How popular were those urban legends before is what I want to know, because it's like, now it's all in retrospect. I have no idea like what the vibe and the atmosphere was at the time of the filming and when that film came out. So I'm like, how did your average Joe know about the Hookman, or was this sort of like a made for the movie, and then it sort of became popular culture as a result? I'd be curious to dig more into that. But as a villain himself, he's not very interesting. I think I wish I cared more about the whodunit, but I think it's everything else along the way. It's the journey, not the destination in this case, because I think they try to make it seem like it might be Ray for a while, but for me, the writing was always on the wall that it wasn't going to be one of the four. And because it wasn't going to be one of the four, well, then did I really care who it was going to be?
Yeah, it feels like the red herring of trying to frame Ray as potentially the killer would have been more interesting, but also completely, like, you knew from the start that was never going to happen. But yeah, the Hookman is just such a faceless legend and such a faceless villain. And it's interesting, when I was rewatching this film, I kept thinking, wait, who was the Hookman again? Like, what was the thing? I remember there was a twist, but the twist is so unmemorable.
Yeah, it's convoluted.
It's really convoluted. Yeah, what do you make of the reveal of Ben Willis being the Hookman?
Well, to be honest with you, I'd watched this film like relatively recently, within the last couple of years, and even rewatching it now, it's like, who's the Hookman again?
Yeah, exactly.
I couldn't remember because I feel like it's very convoluted. Like, because the film opens with the shot of the character that you think they killed. I forget his name, but the teenage boy that accidentally killed his girlfriend, and then he's like, is he going to commit suicide? What is he doing up there on the cliffs? Who is this kid? And then I guess, like, when they go to the house to speak to his sister, at that point, I'm like, I'm not going to lie to you, I'm a little bit clocked out. like, who are we talking about? And then so the premise is, I just want to make sure I've got it right. So they think they've hit this kid who was out there because he was in a car crash with his girlfriend the summer before that, and she died. The actual killer is the girlfriend's father who killed him, seeking revenge for his daughter, and then they hit him, and now he's, I guess, seeking revenge. Well, he's seeking revenge on the kids because they hit him and then they tried to kill him. But also B, maybe is sort of like I have to seek revenge on all teens everywhere for being, for drinking and driving and being teens. It's kind of the vibe. So it's convoluted.
It's a big like boomer villain in many ways, where the motivation is very much, oh, you damn kids just messing around and running people over with your fucking cars all the time.
I'm gonna shake my hook at you.
Yeah. Which he literally does.
I mean, the hook is kind of iconic, I guess.
The hook is great. And to be honest, like, it does, some of the kills are really powerful because it is just this one thing, and he's not a supernatural villain. He's just this hulking presence that has a hook that he can clearly wield like an expert. But yeah, it's convoluted, and the story itself like doesn't actually pay off that much. The motivation wise, I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever.
No, and it's, again, in terms of kind of going back to the main characters too, they try to make it seem like Julie and Ray are endgame. And I'm not buying that for a hot second.
Why though? Like, why?
Yeah, again, these two actors have great screen presence. I don't think they have great chemistry.
No.
And it's really, I mean, also, it doesn't help that in my mind, I'm like, Freddie Prinze Jr. and Sarah Michelle Gellar
are endgame.
Yeah, right? So you're like, this is weird. And I do love that line, though, at the beginning where he's like, nobody understands me like you do. She's like, I understand your pain.
Oh
like,
God.
okay. Like, okay, Kevin Williamson, like, reel it in a little bit, buddy. But then, like, the idea that she thinks for a while that it's Ray. And then in the span of like 15 minutes, she goes from thinking that it's Ray to realizing it's not Ray and being saved by him, kind of, and then being like, oh, I love you. It was always meant to be you. I'm like, man, there's a lot of emotional whiplash happening here for such a smart girl, supposedly.
I know, and for two characters who were not even, like, there was a little bit of, yeah, maybe, but, like, there was no longing looks, there was no build-up to that relationship. Like, why are we supposed to be rooting for them, really, aside from the fact that they're just there, and they're both hot?
I mean, that's the reason. That's the reason, Anna, because they're both just so hot. But then,
that's not a character. That's not a character trait. They're both hot.
Well, that's the thing about Ray. It's like I think the script suffers from trying to make him a red herring because then you just can't do anything with him because it's like all the other characters have such interesting run-ins with the killer early on in terms of him letting them know, I'm here, I'm watching you. And Ray's like, I got a letter. Like, oh, okay.
He doesn't even... Also, I don't think Freddie Prinze Jr. can ever quite do menacing at all.
No.
Like, even in that split second when Julie thinks that he is Billy Willis because of the name of the boat, and he's sort of like, oh, no. Like, let me explain. He just runs after her. And it's supposed to be in that moment that we think, oh, maybe he is the killer or he's associated with the killer in some way. He's just very bad at being menacing. He always has that puppy dog energy that is completely impossible to, like, he does it. Bless him. I think he's great. Range is not his friend. So he can't really pull off being aggressive or menacing. Whereas, Ryan Phillippe, full on psycho.
Yeah, and they never tried to make it seem like... they never went in that direction, which is interesting. But he is... Ryan Phillippe, I mean, I don't want to get into what his personal life is like in real life, but he genuinely is terrifying as a presence. I'm like, I know this man. This man exists and is walking around as like an archetype of how men behave, and it feels really real. Like he feels like the real villain to me.
Absolutely. And when there's that scene as well where he just grabs, I think it's Julie, like literally grabs her by the neck, and nobody says anything, including Ray.
Yeah. I know. Well, that's the other thing about Ray is like, what a wet blanket. I'm like, he just, I don't know. He goes along with everything when that happens. I feel like I keep saying Ryan Felipe, Barry. Barry he very much takes control of the situation once they actually hit the guy, even though he's the drunkest. He's the one with the most logic. And I guess kind of maybe that's the way that's the nature of those sort of situations. It's like you never react the way you would think you should react, but Ray is just I'm sorry Freddie Prinze Jr., but Ray is such a useless character.
He really is. Like, I think for the thing that really stands out to me rewatching these films is that it's all about Julie and Helen, and as we were talking about before, Helen Shivers actually gets the most the biggest character arc and the most gruesome death as well.
Yeah, I'd love to like dive into that scene because I think like if people think this film's mediocre, which how dare they, then the one thing they do always say is, oh, but that chase scene, that death scene with Helen is like, it's iconic. And I really believe, I mean, it's so good and it's so devastating. And every single time I watch it, I think the ending's going to be different. Every single time I'm like, she's going to make it. She's going to make it this time. And it's heartbreaking and it's gruesome and it's not the ending this character deserves, but it's just so well orchestrated, that whole scene.
It's also perhaps the one kill that doesn't depend on cheap jump scares as much as the rest of the movie. What do you make of how this film uses or perhaps abuses the jump scare?
Oh, that's a really good question. I mean, I'm the kind of person that is not scared by jump scares, but I'm startled.
Yeah.
So, which is they're different things, and I can't help that I am a naturally jumpy person. So I'm always the one to jump in a jump scare, even when I see it coming, which is just kind of frustrating, because it's for me it's the character stuff that's really more scary about this, and the trauma that all these characters are experiencing is really is what you connect with. So it's a shame that the film does feel a bit cheapened by kind of these continuous jump scares or fake out jump scares. I mean, the endings of both films sort of being the most grievous error.
Yes.
In that respect. So
yeah, it really surprised me just how much it relies, how much the horror of the films rely on the jump scare, and we'll definitely get to the ending bit. But I wanted to talk to you as well about kind of the gore aspect of it. So the actual kills. We've talked a lot about Helen's death scene, but with the rest of them, it does feel weirdly bloodless for a slasher film.
Yeah, it is. I mean, all I could think of when I was rewatching it was for a man who's going around gouging people with a hook, there's not a lot of crimson on screen.
Yeah.
But I feel like, is the film rated PG-13 in the States? I mean, maybe that's just the case of the demographic, and rather than they wanted, because in the States, you're going to miss your R-rated demographic from like that perspective. It kind of makes sense. I also feel like with going back to the jump scares very quickly, I feel like this might have just been a poor assumption on the filmmaker's part that that's kind of what they needed to make this film interesting and exciting for the teen demographic that they were trying to hit. It's like people will think it's too boring if it's, Shining-esque. I don't know why I'm going to The Shining in my mind, but that's like a slow moving film with, no jump scares. And they were like, no, it's the teens. The teens are coming to see this. We have to put in the jump scares because that's what they want. So I think it's that, to be fair though, that then doesn't necessarily tie into the blood thing, because you think that they'd want more blood on screen. But again, I think it maybe is just a case of like, we don't want to have to make it rated R, which is kind of a boring answer, but
it underpins a lot of decisions. And there's also like, I think that thing about trying to appeal to teens instead of, necessarily seasoned horror fans, can really be felt in the performances and the dialogue as well. I mean, we can't not talk about the moment when Jennifer Love Hewitt just spins around yelling, "What do you want?" at the sky. There's like there's a campness to this film.
Yeah, and that's why when people say it's not good, I'm like, okay, I guess it's not good in the sense that it's like an auteur's finest work, but it's great in that it's also, so let's compare it back to Scream. Like Scream is so self-aware of itself, and it's always like winking at the audience and like nudge nudge here, we know what we're doing, whereas this plays itself really straight. Yes. But it is still very campy, which when you think about things like Friday the 13th or any of its imitators, sort of it's a similar atmosphere. And I think this film is paying homage to earlier 80s slashers in a much more direct and earnest way. And I think that the campy dialogue plays into that. Okay. And I think I'm along for the ride. Like, I don't want this film I don't want the dialogue to be great. I want those moments where she's spinning around and screaming at the sky because it's just more fun to watch. And that's what I want from a slasher.
And what do you think it owes to the slashers of the 80s and the late 70s?
What do you mean by O's? Like,
well, I think you're right in that it's a much more straightforward, straight-laced slasher film, because it's not trying to poke fun at the genre like Scream is. It's not trying to satirize it or upend it in any way. It's trying to tell a very simple stabby story. How do you think kind of it what do you think it owes in that sense to the slashers that came before it? Not necessarily of the time, but like in the late 70s and the 1980s especially.
Well, I think the biggest difference for me is that there's clearly an homage happening. They clearly are taking, like, they're following the footsteps of those earlier iterations of slashers in the late 70s and early 80s. But I think it's the dedication to actually creating, I mean, we've talked about Barry and Ray not being fully fleshed out characters, but Julie and Helen are. And I think it's sort of like, it feels like a 90s reinvention on something that had become really hackneyed by the end of the 80s. It's like, how can we take a really tried and true, straightforward slasher, but actually make you care a little bit when someone gets killed?
That's a fair point. And we kind of alluded to it before, but what do you think about the fake out ending?
I remember this ending. This is, if I remember anything from this film, it's the Helen scene and it's the ending.
Okay.
And also, I mean, we have to go back and the spinning around and screaming at the sky. I mean, those are like, that's the holy trinity of this film. And I'm going to double down and I'm going to say the ending is sort of in alignment with like the dialogue of the film. It's not necessarily in alignment with like the way that the film's been pretty straightforward up until that point. But again, like there's been fake jump scares throughout, like a lot of jump scares throughout. And it's like, I'm fine with that ending. It's like, you thought you were safe, you get a little wham wham punch, and then the lights go up and you walk outside and you continue your day. I feel like I like it. It's good.
It's the sort of ending that you're like, oh, so you're already thinking about the sequel. Will it make sense? Probably not. But you're also like implying that your lead final girl is going to get murdered, but you're not going to see the murder. And then you will conveniently ignore this ending when you actually do the sequel.
Well, saying that, I mean, if we're talking about how it pays homage to 80s classics, I mean, it's Friday the 13th.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing because that actress comes back at the part 2. And I guess it's the question of like, is this reality? Is this a nightmare? Is this trauma? And I guess maybe in Friday the 13th, it feels a bit more dreamlike because it's like, why is she floating a canoe in the middle of the lake? Whereas this feels like a more grounded kind of, we understand the situation she's in. But I think that's what it's doing. I think it's, again, it's the carry hand coming up through the ground. It's that final punch to the audience's gut before credits roll. And they just felt like they needed to do that with all guns a-blazing.
And on that note, shall we move on to talking about the sequel? I Still Know What You Did Last Summer.
I have to appreciate, yes, I'll say yes. And then also, I love that they called it I Still Know What You Did Last Summer instead of I Know What You Did Last Summer too.
I love that too. I think it's like one of the best names for a sequel because it's also this thing of like, I'm still here. I still know. And I know that you still want to continue watching the slasher movie.
Although saying that, it was a wham, bam situation watching them back to back. Like,
what do you mean?
Well, I'd never watched these movies right back to back before.
Uh-huh.
And then, rewatching to discuss with you, I watched them back to back, and that was a wild ride. Like, just the whiplash that I experienced, tonally, and just the atmospheres of the films are so different. I mean, we could get into it, but
yeah. So let's get into it. Let's before we dive into I Still Know, can you briefly summarize where this film picks up from the events from the first one?
Yes. So it picks up the next summer after the events of I Know What You Did Last Summer.
Mm-hmm.
And wow, how do I even describe this movie? It is probably the most absurd premise for a slasher sequel. Because the filmmakers really did think to themselves, they're like, what if this time we go to the Bahamas? So it's basically the premise of the first film, but in the Bahamas. And they also were like, maybe we should have some racial diversity because it was a pretty white movie the first time around. So we'll do that. And then they also were like, we got to have another twist. So there's another twist on top of it that, again, very convoluted.
Much.
I haven't described this film. I'm terrible at describing movies, is what I've discovered through this process of talking to you, Anna. But I hope I've teased the film well enough that folks are interested.
I mean, basically, you are correct. It is the same thing, except they have to find a reason to get these characters in an isolated place where there's a lot of water because we're back to the hookman, we're back to the fisherman vibe. They need to be surrounded by water and fishing boats. Ray is out of the picture for most of the film.
Thank God, though. I mean,
yeah, truly. And yet still he somehow manages to be annoying.
Yes. Oh, we'll talk about that.
Oh, yeah. Where is Julie James when we meet her? Because she seemed pretty happy at the end of the first film. She's like, oh, I'm done with my trauma. My hair is clean and shiny again. Because you can, the character expressions are very much presented through the hair. So when Julie is upset and depressed, her hair is really lackluster and flat and and has lost its shine. And then when she's happy again and bubbly, her hair looks wonderful. So her hair is looking great at the beginning of this one. And what's her life like when we meet her here the summer after the events of the first film?
Yeah, well, this is where watching them back to back, I think it doesn't make sense because, as you say, at the end of the last one, she's like perky Julie again.
Mm-hmm.
She's surpassed her trauma. She's happy with Ray. She's back at university, and then in this one, it's like she's doing summer school. So the film literally starts with a dream sequence of her being still traumatized and screaming and waking up in class. And she's clearly still completely traumatized to the point where she doesn't want to return to Southport. And that place for her, a place of such trauma that she can't think about going back there. But then it's a very strange one because she seems traumatized, but then within the span of a scene, she'll be really upset and then bounce back to being smiley again. Mm-hmm. Like when she's traumatized and comes home and is like reflecting on not being able to go back to Southport, and then the next minute she's in a club dancing. So I think Julie is a mess, is what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. Julie doesn't know how Julie is at the beginning of I Still Know What You Did Last Summer.
Mm-hmm. I mean, and so she's it's never made quite clear because she was in college already in the last film, and now I'm guessing she's still in college, maybe grad school, perhaps.
Well, that's the thing, is because they had to set it at 4th of July, of course, because it has to be on the anniversary of the death. But you don't go to school, and at least in the States, you don't go to school on July 4th. Like, that's not when class would be in session. So they're like, oh, it's summer school. Like, they kind of have to make it work because they wanted her to be in college. So it's again, it's just a bit like I could see all of the gears and like levers being pulled where the filmmakers are desperately trying to make this scenario work.
So she is kind of a downer in college. Her roommate is Brandy. Brandy plays the character Carla, and Brandy at this point is, like, we should say, a massive star. So she had already, like, been a successful musician, and she'd already been starring in Moesha, the sitcom that she was the titular character of for years. So this is a big deal. Like, Brandy and Jennifer Love Hewitt in this film, and then they win a radio competition by guessing incorrectly what the capital of Brazil is. It is not Rio de Janeiro. So when I was watching this, I remember being like, oh, so this was kind of planted from the beginning, that this was a full-on setup, because it was really funny to think, oh, you can't just Google this on your phone really quickly. But at the same time, that is not the capital of Brazil. You're going to get slaughtered.
Well, here's the thing, is like how much the film trusts the audience not to know that. Because it goes down one of two paths. Either you're smart enough to know that that's not the capital of Brazil and you immediately know it's a con, or you're, in the dark with Carla and Julie, and you're like, oh, okay, so this is weird, but I guess, I guess they're going to the Bahamas. So that's the thing, is I'm like, do they expect this? Do they expect everyone watching this movie to know that this isn't true? And also, Julie's painted, at least from the beginning of the first film, to be this intelligent young woman. I'm like, how do neither one of these young women who are, university educated not know what the capital of Brazil is?
I mean, as someone who is terrible at geography, I'm not going to judge them, but even I know the capital of Brazil.
Yeah, I don't know. That to me is like, again, this film, writing is not its strong suit. There's a lot of things about this film that are not strong suits, but that is like the very loosely threaded plot it's just dangling from the very beginning.
Well, let's talk about the new characters in this film, because we have Julie, we have Ray who's mostly on the phone with Julie, thank God. But we also get Carla, who we mentioned, who's played by Brandy. We get Tyrell, her boyfriend, who's played by Mackie Pfeiffer. And we get the new character, the absolutely charmless,
I know,
charisma vacuum of Will Benson. And, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, Ben's son. Will is performing the Ray thing of, oh, I'm the cute, soft-spoken new boy, but also actually the killer.
I feel like the character type of Will feels like a 90s teen archetype.
Okay. Because
I feel like, I'm trying to think of it, but I feel like there's multiple films where there's a character like Will. Mm-hmm. In sequels specifically, I guess I'm thinking of like Scream 2 as well, where like the character is, maybe I'm also thinking of the fact that he's the son of the killer, because isn't he like his mother in Scream 2? It's like a mother-son killing duo. So I don't know. It feels
in Scream 2, it's Billy Loomis's mother, but it's Billy Loomis is the killer in Scream 1.
Yes.
So I'm getting big Billy Loomis vibes from Will, but at the same time, the Derek vibes from Scream 2. So that's Sydney's college boyfriend, played by Jerry O'Connell, who is just the most vanilla, beige, bland type of white boy who she dates in university. And it's just like, charisma is not a word he knows exists.
Yes. And that's why maybe I'm thinking like this feels like an archetype, because it just he's so kind of, he just blends together with so many other characters from other films in my mind.
Yeah.
And it's also like, Carla and Tyrell are not going to be the killers, but it's like, oh, who's this mysterious white man who they're just like throwing into the film?
Yeah.
It's of course this isn't going to end well. But I love seeing Brandy on screen. She's a pure joy, and I do like that I think that this could have gone down a very kind of dangerous road of like making her like a sassy female Black character. And I don't think the film completely falls into that trap. I think Carla's an interesting character who's a bit like, who's fairly well-rounded for the for the type of film it is. I love when I think you have the scene like where she's like, I'm going to change my major to finance so that I can become a rich woman and go to Wall Street and then like go on holidays like this. I was like, I don't know. This is like, she's fun. She has more personality to her than just Julie James's like roommate, which I feel like, again, this is why I'm thinking of Scream 2, because it's a similar, there's a lot of like parallels in terms of the types of characters we're getting.
Totally. And I think you're right in that Carla is a much more, again, similarly to Helen Shivers in the first one, Carla is a better character than Julie James is in this film. She's got more stuff to do. She's got ambition. She's doing stuff. She's like an active character. And she also, and she survives.
Yes. Oh, well, that's the other thing.
Which is really important, especially because, and there's, not to self-plug, but there's a great article that Isora Barbara Brown wrote, I think the first one that she wrote for the Final Girls, about Carla and kind of the absence of Black final girls in this era and in slasher films in general. And she's important for many reasons, not just that, but I think she's again kind of the standout character of the film, not so much Julie.
No, I totally agree with you. And it's as sad as I was about Helen dying in the first film, I'm that much more excited that Carla, they decided to let her live, because like, again, kill Julie. I don't care at this point. The girl deserves it at this point. She's just like, I'm done with Julie James. I don't find her that interesting. But Carla's, I'm really glad that she made it to the end. And I would personally watch another sequel where Carla is in it.
Totally. We don't really need Julie that much. I mean, I think Mekhi Phifer with Tyrell doesn't really get that much to do except just be horny all the time.
Yeah. He's the comic relief.
Yeah.
Which is fine. It's fine. But I feel like, again, it's similar to what we were saying about Barry and Ray. The girls really are the stars here. And it's like they have their little boyfriends along for the ride. So I'm kind of okay with that. And I also, sorry to speak over you. I feel like we're leaving out a very important character from this film, which is Jack Black.
Oh my God. I was going to bring it up at some point, but then I also don't want to, because Jack Black, my dude, what are you doing? What are those choices?
It's well, and also like, because I'm thinking about like where Jack Black was in his career at this point. Like, I feel like he wasn't a household name yet. I think he was just showing up in like bit parts and things. Yeah. But, I mean,
for anyone who doesn't remember this, Jack Black, who I think is uncredited as well in this film, plays a character, a hotel employee called Titus Telesco.
That's his name?
That's his name. I looked it up.
I could not have told you his name if you'd put a gun to my head.
Me either, but I looked it up for the purposes of being professional, and I was like, it made it worse. It made it worse. I would have preferred if he continued being unnamed. He plays Titus Telesco, who goes around with a Hawaiian shirt, dreadlocks, and keeps trying to talk in a fake Caribbean accent, offering weed to everyone.
It's so bizarre. It's, why did they put this in the film? It's so strange. It's like simultaneously remarkably cringy and obviously super un-PC, but also like, because of that, it turns back around again on itself to the point where I'm like, am I laughing? Like, is it actually funny? It's just very uncomfortable.
It's just bad. I think it is just bad. And to be honest, I'm like, yeah, I'm kind of glad when he gets murdered. I'm like, okay, bye, Titus. It was not nice knowing you.
Well, it's like, again, yeah, he serves no point, I guess, except they thought like they throw him in for a bit of comic relief, which, you know, they missed the mark on that one. But he serves no other point to the plot as far as like there's no like structural reasons why he's in the film.
I mean, there's a few things in this film where they try really aggressively to be funny and it just kind of doesn't land at all.
Yeah. It's weird to me because like the first one, again, like the dialogue was a bit campy at times, but it was still very straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess maybe they just leaned full cheese in this one. They all bets were off.
Yeah. And also this is not an early Williamson script. This is someone completely different and obviously not Kevin Williamson.
Right. And you also have Reanimator Man.
Jeffrey Combs, yeah.
Jeffrey Combs, yeah.
I was going to say the kind of the faces that pop up in this film are amazing. So we've got Jeffrey Combs pop up as the hotel manager. We've got John Hawkes pop up as a fellow fisherman. Did you see him?
Yeah. I mean, it was fun. I mean, I always love it in horror films when there's sort of these other faces from the genre that pop up. And Jeffrey Combs in particular is, I mean, he's got such a recognizable look.
Yes.
Even though, you know, I mean, I know him from Reanimator, but he's much older in this, but it's still like the moment you see him, you're like, what are you doing here? And he's great in it. I think, like, I wanted more Jeffrey Combs personally.
And also you've got Jennifer Esposito, who plays the Coyote Ugly-ish mean bartender who then gets involved with the kids.
Yeah. No, I mean, I forget, like, well, I guess the other thing about it being a sequel is that you need more bodies, right?
Yes.
And I love that they're like, it's an isolated place in the Bahamas, but the characters just keep popping up out of the woodwork. And in the first film, you know, you really do just have those 4 characters and you're really with them the whole way through. But this time it's like, it feels like every 10 minutes they're like adding in another character. They're bouncing around in terms of like different characters' perspectives. I mean, because, you know, you keep going back to Ray as well and his pilgrimage to try to get to Julie. So yeah, there's a lot happening. It's very busy.
Shout out as well to Bill Cobbs, who plays the kind of the elderly hotel worker who is like a long character actor. He was in The People Under the Stairs and a bunch of like other amazing 1980s and 70s films. Not always horror, but there's a completely inexplicable scene where they try to retcon us into thinking that he might be the Hookman because he's seen doing some sort of voodoo practice. I'm like, what?
Yeah. Well, you know,
what fucking white nonsense is this? Like, what are you doing?
I mean, well, this is also why this franchise really reminds me of the Scooby-Doo movie. Well, and also because of the actors, of course, but they try that in Scooby-Doo too. I don't know if you've seen the live-action Scooby-Doo movie. I hope you have.
I have indeed.
But they do a similar thing there, and it's also like the premise of it being on like this tropical island. Like this movie is like they'd be a great double bill, you know. But yeah, they try
Freddie Prinze Jr. double bill.
Exactly. Although Fred Jones is really the role he was meant to play. Let's be honest. He's serving his energy is more in alignment with who Fred Jones is as a character rather than Ray.
It's actually perfect casting. But on the subject of Ray, though, let's talk a little bit about Ray, what he's doing, and where does he stand in the world of teen horror bad boyfriends.
Ooh, well, he's definitely on the list. He's close, but I wouldn't say he's top of the list because I mean I think Billy Loomis might take that crowning gem. But I mean he's bad in that he's, especially in this film, I really don't understand his actions at all. Because from the very beginning he shows up and he gets in a fight with Julie and then he leaves. And he's like, I don't have time for your trauma. Bye. And it's really weird that they would want to go back to Southport after everything that had happened. But he's like, I'm a fisherman. That's my calling. I have to go back to Southport. I'm like, there's other coasts you could go to, my friend, if you really are set on the fisherman thing.
So I'm sorry that your girlfriend and you experienced massive, like a deranged killer trying to kill you for just a year ago. she just doesn't want to go back to that fucking place. She's trying to be a lawyer, dude. Maybe show some empathy.
Yeah. And like, especially because he wants to go back on the anniversary. I'm like, did you not think that this was going to dredge up uncomfortable memories and like emotions? Clearly he's just a robot because he does not have that same like emotional spectrum. But that's why I don't understand why they're a couple. But
they're a couple because they're hot.
Okay. Yes. No, you're right. How could I forget? But also just the premise of him in this film where he is so angry at Julie about not wanting to come back to Southport to the point where I guess it's not his fault technically that I didn't show up to go to the Bahamas, but he doesn't want to go in the first instance. And yet the next moment he's like, yeah, I'm going to propose to her. I'm like, what? What?
Because I hadn't rewatched this film in so long. When he pulled out the ring, I was like, okay, what? Like, you've just been a massive dick to your girlfriend. Like, how do you go from that to proposing to her? You sounded like you were gonna do a Ross and be like, oh, we're on a break.
Yeah.
And then also, Ray, babes, why are you bringing a fucking diamond proposal ring to your fishing boat?
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Like,
oh, man.
Bound to be lost. What are you doing?
Well, we've already established that Ray doesn't have a lot happening between his ears, you know? Like, he's just...
Also, like, not to be paranoid, but, like, I don't know what his relationship with John Hawkes' character is. Like, John Hawkes is just there in the background, and then he's, like, whipping out this diamond ring and showing it to him, and you're like, are you friends? Is that... What I don't know. If I was this guy, I'd probably just like punch you a little bit and steal the ring or something.
Yeah, it's again, that's why it's like nobody acts like a real person in this movie.
Yeah.
And in the first movie, it again, because I really do feel like there's some great explorations. It's not fully fleshed out, but explorations of like how people are suffering through trauma and grief and also like moving into adulthood. And I mean, Ray's character isn't a great example of that in the first film either, but this, at least people acted like people kind of in the first movie. This one, it's just like everybody's a Scooby-Doo character. Like everybody's just a caricature of a person.
On the Scooby-Doo note, do you think the whodunit aspect of the sequel works?
Absolutely not. No.
Go off, Alec.
Listen, Anna. I mean, we talked about the first one being convoluted. I just watched this movie a few days ago, and I still am like, what the hell happened at the end? Like, I was like, there's just too many people. There's so much happens in like the last 20 minutes of this film. I'm just like, I didn't really care. I was just along for the ride. And B, it's so convoluted that by the time I've finally wrapped my head around who it is, which can we like go through who it is? Because it's Will, and he's Ben's son. Which I always hate this when they're like, he secretly had a son that just never came up in the first film.
I know.
But then, is there somebody else there too?
It's Ben. Ben comes back.
Right. Okay. So that's the thing. I'm like, again, in the first movie, we were talking about like the lack of blood and it feeling like he's not really a paranormal figure. You know, he's menacing, and I think part of the fear of him as a villain is that he's not mythic. He feels real, and he's just killing people with his hook, and then you bring him back again, and it's like it reaches levels of like Friday the 13th part, whatever it is, where he gets struck by lightning, and you're like, okay, all right, so this is what we've descended into now.
Yeah, it's like, I know that we only see his hook hand come up in the fishing net at the end of the first one, which is like a great little, oh, well, you know, we'll find his body one day. It will turn up eventually, which is, you know, you need to see the killer dead at the end in order to know that they're fully dead. So the setup was there, but also now it's like, oh, you're trying to do the two killers, and now Ben is Will is Ben's son, and you do I hate the line of dialogue where the actor was like, Will Ben's son?
Oh, I know.
Get it?
I know. Oh. Okay, that's the point where I'm like I like flip the table, but I'm also kind of like, this is no longer even trying to be a horror film. Like, it's no longer trying to be in any way scary. Like, it stops being scary. It's not, this movie isn't scary. It's just silly. It's the kind of movie I would have a great time seeing in cinema on opening weekend when you've got like, you know, when it's like Scream 2 vibes in the cinema and everybody's just going crazy. Like, it would be a very fun movie to watch with a group of people, but it's like, it's a piss poor horror film.
It really is. And like the fact that I'm more emotionally invested in Tyrell getting laid with his girlfriend than I am in Will and Ben's, you know, revenge plot is quite telling.
Well, and not to kind of work backwards, but other things about this movie where I'm like, nobody's acting like a person. I'm like, after there's all these killings happening and, you know that there's some sort of threat on the island, Julie James is like, I'm just going to hop in the tanning bed.
Oh my God, that scene.
I'm like, what?
What is that scene? The amount of slow motion panning of Jennifer Love Hewitt's body, I'm like, have I accidentally switched over to a softcore porn? Like, what the fuck is going on? Why are we getting 5 full minutes of her getting undressed and settling into a tanning bed?
Well, because the film kind of did that the first film was guilty of that too, in terms of the male gaziness of that character specifically. But man, did they just double down on it in this one. It's like, it's just hit shots all the time.
Yeah.
It's always, the camera is always panning to her cleavage constantly. And the way they dress her, it's just like, and I get it, Jennifer Love Hewitt is a beautiful lady, but oh man, it is just excessive. Needlessly excessive.
It is very excessive. But it's also like, it adds nothing to the story. It's like, yeah, I get, but the framing of basically, like you say, just tit shots all the time. I was like, did you even try to shoot her face? Like, at all?
I know.
And also, by the way, they never do that with Ray. Not a single shirtless take of Ray, I should add. So it's just unfair.
It is. The double standard.
And is there anything else about this film that just, it sounds like it kind of infuriated both of us as a teen slasher, but is there anything else that you think just has aged really badly about it?
Oh God. I mean, how much more time do you have? I think the entire thing is, it's just like, it's like this domino effect. Like, every little thing adds up, and it's just like a house of cards, basically, with just how ridiculous the premise is. And I know we've kind of been talking a lot of shit about it, but all of that being said, it is an incredibly campy ride. And I do think it's worth watching because, well, you get a fantastic performance from Brandy. And as we said, you know, there's the merits are you get all these great character actors coming in, genre actors coming in and doing these little cameos. Jack Black, not part of that, but,
nope.
But everything else about it is just like, the premise is so stupid that I kind of like losing 2 hours of my life to it. And
shall we briefly talk about the second fake out ending?
Well, I said, when we were talking about the first one, I like the first one's ending. I think it's like that 1-2 punch right before the end of the film. And you kind of need that because it's also in keeping with like the homage that it's playing to from earlier slashers. But this one is just,
it's nonsensical.
Because at least in the first one, the idea that he could be dead, he might not be dead because he didn't recover a body. I mean, this one, the girl shoots him dead literally into a grave. So the idea that he's just under her bed is just absurd. So absurd. Oh, no, that was just like eye-rollingly bad.
I mean, truly. And also, so Ray and Julie marry and they buy a house.
Well,
in Southport.
That too. Like, okay, so after all of that, again, it's like we've hit the reset button and she has no trauma anymore. And like things between them are great. And like, she's like, oh, you know me so well. I'm like, does he?
Yeah. And also Ray trying to do sexy banter with Julie.
Oh, God. Again, no chemistry. No chemistry.
Zero.
Bring back Helen. Bring back Helen Shivers.
Fucking truly, I would have given anything for Helen Shivers' like zombie body to appear and make this interesting again. To wrap up our chat about the I Know What You Did Last Summer films, do you think together they hold up? Would you recommend people rewatch them?
This is a loaded question. You're tricking me. I don't know what the right answer is.
There's no right or wrong answer to this.
I'm trash, Anna, and so I'm gonna say these should definitely be in your list of to watch. 100%.
If you identify as trash, then yes, rewatch them. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Well, okay. The first one is like, I think it's genuinely a good 90s teen horror film. I think it's a very worthy addition to that era of films. Mm-hmm. And it's not Scream, nothing is, but it has a lot going for it. But the second one is a hot mess, and I think it's worth watching just to see the sheer absurdity of that. Like, if you haven't experienced I Still Know What You Did Last Summer, you should just, you need to give yourself that at least one time in your life, I think. And maybe I would almost say, like, don't watch these films back to back.
Oh, interesting.
Because they're just so tonally different that despite being part of the same franchise, I think they benefit from being watched in separate viewings. I think they benefit from, like, I Still Know What You Did Last Summer, I think benefits from, like, you kind of remember what the first one's like, so that you're much more forgiving.
That's very good advice. Don't double bill this.
I would say, if you want to get a good double bill, I Still Know What You Did Last Summer and Scooby-Doo.
You know what? That is a ballsy double bill, and I respect it completely.
Really, what I want to transition into is, can we just talk about Scooby-Doo? Because big Scooby-Doo fan.
I know who to call when I'm going to do a Scooby-Doo episode. Ali, thank you so much for your time and for your insight in both these films. Can you tell people where they can find more of your work online?
Yeah, so I think I'd mentioned before that I'm not really online that much individually, but my quarantine project was I've always been in, obviously into horror, but into B movies in general. And I've been wanting to get a VHS player for a really long time to sort of wade into the nostalgia of it all. And I got one over quarantine, and me and my partner started collecting VHS tapes. And for us, the weirder the better. If we don't like to get, more mainstream films that everybody's heard of, we like to find really terrible B movies, as well as like films that might be only on VHS, like how-to things, or things that just, in the 90s when they were just putting everything on VHS and selling it. Collecting those sort of oddities has been, and just finding the treasure amongst it has been such a fun hobby. And I just decided to start an Instagram because I was like, I should be like taking funny moments from these films, or, at least the covers of VHSs, like the physical media is so, it's just so much fun, and we don't get that anymore in the age of streaming. So I have an Instagram that is called _VHS_graveyard.
Okay.
And essentially it's just me having a good time with my VHS tapes.
That sounds like a blast. Thank you so much, Ali.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anna.